You know, when Noah wanted to build his ark, most of the people laughed at him. Why are you building this damn ark? I think it's time to panic. We got to build our ark, too. The threat to organized human existence. Climate pollutants. Nuclear incident. Landfills. Nuclear terrorism. And cow farts. The threats that human technology now portend. Civilization could deteriorate. Nothing is more serious in the world than extinction, to quote the apocalypse. And I think this has to be at the level of a crusade. The existential threat of our time, it's not going to be 110, it's going to be 130. A complete wasteland. 135 for months on end. It could be so hot here, it becomes unlivable. You're going to see mass migrations, extinction of millions of species. Vector diseases, forest fires. This isn't for me. I'm going to be dead. It's for you. Is this the end of the world? It is the end of the world as we know it. It's time to panic. It is the end of the world as we know it. A complete wasteland. It is the end of the world as we know it. I'm going to be dead.
And now, an update from the Apocalypse Desk.
Oh, it's here.
Here's John and Ken.
It's really here.
Yeah. We're down to just a few years left.
We'll tell you exactly.
We're all gone.
John and Ken show here on KFI. Well, Jerry Brown is not at the center of this story, but certainly the theme, the Apocalypse Desk, is necessary. We now have the United Nations coming out in a new report. This is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Yep, remember the IPCC? They've been around since the days of Al Gore's warnings about the end of the world as we know it. They are saying that Earth is on track to face devastating consequences of climate change, which include extreme drought, food shortages, deadly flooding, unless we do an unprecedented effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2030, which is why we've been telling you we've only got 12 years left.
Yeah, really, just 11.
Basically, they're saying we have to be carbon neutral by 2050. And this is all about the rising temperatures. 1.5 degrees Celsius. If we exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in warming, there could be heat waves, hot summers, sea level rise, and for many parts of the world, worse droughts and rainfall extremes, according to a scientist at the University of Melbourne.
We must make rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society.
So one of the ways they think they'll have, and the only way they can think of to do this, is a massive carbon tax on you. And we're talking massive numbers in order to, basically, what they're saying is the cost of carbon, in whatever form you're talking about, is really too cheap to get people to change their habits. So you need to make it very, very expensive. A carbon tax is a charge imposed on the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas, which produce carbon dioxide. The tax is designed to make users of those fees pay for the environmental damage that they cause. But really, the idea is to price you out.
Oh, yeah, to make it impossible for you to use gasoline and oil.
We got one sales pitch from somebody from one of these agencies that if you read specifically what they're talking about in this climate report from the United Nations, we may be talking $200 for a gallon of gas in order to really, yes.
Well,
and that way it'd be so expensive you would have to find some other way to get about.
The only way to do what they claim needs to be done is to revert back to the 1800s. There's no more
horses?
Driving. There's no airplane
but
travel.
Horses fart, right?
Well, yeah, you've got to stop eating meat, that's for sure, right? Because of the cow farts. Nothing. You can't drive anything. You can't fly. You can't have any industry. No factories. Bill Clinton once said you'd have to reduce by 80% the amount of carbon dioxide we put into the air. 80%, which means rolling back to the 1800s. Oh, and you'd have to do it around the whole world, not just in California, the whole world. This is the most impossible, ridiculous notion that they keep pushing.
Researchers at Columbia University estimate that a tax of $50 per ton of carbon dioxide emissions would increase the average U.S. consumer electricity bills by 22% by the year 2030. And a report by the Heritage Foundation from a few years ago said a tax of $37 a ton would cut economic output by more than $2.5 trillion. That's $21,000 per family by the year 2030. Because the only way they're going to do this is by making these things so expensive that you're just going to have to find a way to cut back on your carbon use. You won't fly as much. You won't drive as much. You won't turn on the air conditioner as much.
If gas costs $240 a gallon, you're not going to be driving at all. There's going to be zero driving going on. And that was their proposal, $240 a gallon.
Yeah, I read anywhere from $90 to $240 a gallon. Could be the range of...
Well, it'd have to be at the high range because you'd have to reduce what we're doing to near zero in order to stop the heating of the planet. You have to stop the heating of the planet. Then you have to start rolling it back.
Is that what it means by the world must become carbon neutral by 2050? That basically means, I don't know.
You can't add any more carbon into the system.
Into the system, I see.
But that's the world. Now,
with the population growing.
That is, and 1,000% assurance you cannot control what the developing world is doing. China and India, which is almost 2.5 billion people now, that are rapidly expanding and growing.
Oh, there's no cork in that.
Yeah, they're at the time that we were at in the early 1900s, where the middle class has really not yet bloomed fully. But they will. And what made us wealthy as a nation, what made life good, is our ability to make things. Heavy industry. We made goods. We produced goods. That brought us in money. And then we were able to drive, and we were able to fly. And we could move those goods and sell them to other markets. Otherwise, this is what I don't understand. Everybody carps about the poverty around the world. Well, what took us out of poverty to a very, very large extent was modern life, was carbon fuels. You can't get out of poverty and not burn carbon fuels. It's impossible. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. The industrial age brought great wealth to people. Otherwise, people were just living on farms and living from week to week with the chickens and the tomatoes they were growing and milking their cows and then selling the milk and the tomatoes and the chickens at the local market. All right, here's 1988.
Oh, yeah.
Philip Shabakov, New York Times, June 24th, 1988. Think of where you were then. Maybe you didn't exist. He wrote in the Times...
That was our first year together in radio.
If the current pace of the buildup of these gases continue, the effect is likely to be a warming of 3 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit between now and the year 2025 to 2050. The rise in global temperature is expected to cause sea levels to rise 1 to 4 feet by the middle of the next century. 30 years ago. Oh. And as it turns out, the temperature increase was 1 degree.
Oh.
And the sea level rise has been a few inches. So it wasn't 3 to 9 degrees, and it wasn't 1 to 4 feet. 4 feet? No, it was 3 inches.
That's because we
9 degrees? No, it was 1 degree.
We did stuff to...
No. It's still increasing. And the rate of sea level rise from 1925 to 1960 is just as large as the sea level rise of the last few decades. Human emissions of CO2 mostly grew after 1950. So humans don't seem to be the blame for the early 20th century sea rise, nor for the sea level rise in the 19th and late 18th centuries. Al Gore claimed in 2006 that the sea levels could rise 20 feet. 20 feet!
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
3 inches. By the way, the Earth has been warming slowly since we came out of the Little Ice Age. Nobody wants to go back to the Little Ice Age. That was in the early 1800s, I think.
Yeah.
And you had 11 months of winter in New England. They had snow and ice in New England for 11 months out of the year. James Hansen, a scientist who's been yelling about climate change for over 30 years, when he reviewed Al Gore's documentary claimed we have at most 10 years. 10 years to alter fundamentally the trajectory of global greenhouse emissions. Gore said it's point of no return. Hansen says critical tipping point. Well, the 10 years went by, and not much has happened since. They have been wrong and 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 wrong again and again and again. They're hysterical. They have emotional problems. And they're all making a lot of money off the scam. Al Gore is making many, many millions off this scam.
What's the projection out here? Oh, we're going to drown, right? Is it going to be sea levels are going to sink California?
You know, that 3 inches.
And
you know what that 3 inches has done to
drought.
people?
We've already had drought. I know what?
Oh, millions have drowned. You raise the sea level by 3 inches? Huh.
That's a tsunami. All right, we got more coming up.
John and Ken Show. John Cobell and Ken Champeau.